past the clouds, over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star. Opened the earth, walking with blood-soaked feet. She challenged the whip, the gun, the knife. She challenged the fire, pulled from the bodies of slaves, made into laws, prisons, and courts.
Greetings and welcome back. Thank you all for joining me. We are more than aware of the conflict and the genocide that is ongoing in historic Palestine. There's another war and genocide taking place. The BBC reports of mass killings in Sudan have echoes of its dark past. Emerging evidence of systematic killings in the Sudanese city of El Fasher have prompted human rights and aid activists to describe the civil war between the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or the RSF, and the military as a continuation of the Darfur genocide. What are we to make of this reporting? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. With each show, my guests and I provide insight and analysis into current events in the broader historical landscape or context in which most of these events take place. Let's quickly look at some of today's headlines. Federal agent tried to convince Venezuelan pilot to fly Venezuelan President Maduro into U.S. territory so he could be arrested. News of the year-long effort was reported this past Tuesday by the Associated Press. According to the report, the agent Edwin Lopez engaged in dialogue with a pilot for well over a year in an effort to get him to flip on Maduro. The plan was first hatched after Lopez received a tip about Venezuelan planes undergoing repairs in the Dominican Republic. And folks, is there no end to the madness? They wanted to kidnap the democratically elected president of Venezuela. Trump administration in panic as major diplomatic deal shows signs of falling apart. Officials in the Trump administration are panicking as the president's Gaza so-called peace deal runs the risk of collapsing. As though they actually expected that what they put on the table was a peace deal. Again, no discussion of the right to return. No discussion of sovereignty for the Palestinians. what did they expect would happen? And they actually expected that Israel was going to abide by the plan and not use every opportunity as an excuse to kill more Palestinians? How foolish are these people? Pakistan threatens to quote unquote obliterate Taliban after peace talks fall apart. Pakistan's defense minister said yesterday that he threatened to obliterate the Taliban, which controls neighboring Afghanistan, after negotiation towards a lasting peace between the two sides failed. And remember, Donald Trump told us that this one was going to be easy to fix and that he could do it in a day. Finally, this one I just heard. Trump administration slashes number of refugees, prioritizing Afrikaners. The Trump administration announced today it's going to slash the number of refugees the United States will accept in the coming year, capping them at 7,500, and most of them will be from white South Africans, because Trump believes they are dealing with genocide. On today's episode, the issue before us is the fall of al-Fashir in the Darfur region after an 18-month RSF siege brings together the different layers of the country's conflict with echoes of its dark past. My guest is Erica Caines, a writer and organizer in Baltimore and for the district Maryland, Virginia areas. She's the national co-creator of the Black Alliance for Peace, co-editor of Hood Communist, founder of #Liberation Through Reading, which provides African children with books that represent them. Erica Caines, as always, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
So give us your analysis of this reporting. Is it as clear-cut as this BBC report wants to make it out to be?
Yeah. So at its core, what we are witnessing is a dangerous sort of integrated global system. I appreciate that the headline for this interview speaks to the U.S.'s role, because I do not think there has been enough conversation about how this has been playing out. The tactics, the technologies, the geopolitical strategies, as refined in this African conflict and African conflict zones, specifically through a sort of framework of these military commands like AFRICOM, do not just stay there. So I do think it's important to have a larger conversation and connect these dots to see how all of this actually does impact and shape domestic policing in the U.S., because these are replicated neocolonial arrangements where we see African nations are tasked as junior partners in regional pacifications. And we see that playing out here domestically with this misleadership class. But just to contextualize Sudan a bit, I think I talk about the ways that it is not discussed enough. We can talk about that for sure, because we understand the impacts of colonialism and imperialism as it's formatted in Zionism to be really the objective, the primary objective in terms of how we're understanding defeating imperialism. And I do think that Sudan is a part of that conversation. Well, we can talk about al-Bashir being the sort of canary in the coal mine, if you will. So the capture of al-Bashir by the UAE-backed Rapid Support Forces, and we could talk about the United Emirates in a bit, is a culmination of this sort of integrated system. It demonstrates how external powers like the UAE can be used or are using a proxy force like the RSF to achieve regional dominance, controlling a strategic kind of crossroads, and then also its resources. And the RSF's tactics, siege, starvations, attacks on hospitals, massacres, these are just a brutal form of population control. The international community, when we talk about like the kind of silence or this sort of cloak, if you will,
Mhm.
around the information coming about and out of Sudan around what's happening, has really resulted in a sort of tepid community response. But it also shows how economic and strategic interests conflict, if you will, with human rights. So for me, the significance in how we've come to understand Palestine over the last 2 years of that genocide versus how the horrific massacres and the wiping out of a people in Sudan has been not only understood but reported, has been the difference between understanding Palestine through a lens of decolonial struggle versus understanding Sudan through a lens of humanitarian crisis. And the latter kind of disallows the broader public to really begin to understand how it has come to be, as opposed to a general sort of African Civil War, quote unquote, narrative that's perpetual.
So is it a matter of, yes, in Sudan, in Darfur, people are starving. Yes, atrocities are being committed, but if you look at it simply through that lens, then you fail to understand the why, and you fail to understand the who is responsible.
Yeah. So even when we talk about, what is the US's role, or even highlighting that this month is Black Alliance for Peace 5th annual month of action against AFRICOM, I think it's important to kind of contextualize how it's come to be. We talk about this sort of great grab of Africa, how it was split up, and the sort of colonial components of Africa, but we do not talk enough about the continuous sort of grab and capture, or struggled for capture, of the continent, and then also the role that neocolonialism plays today. And I think that's where AFRICOM comes into play, because AFRICOM's main aim in this regard is to intensify and coordinate activities dealing with this sort of quote unquote war on terror, right? Which would involve these sort of civil wars that are more or less manufactured. So they're wanting to control this in Africa by coordinating and managing initiatives furthering security development, these sort of terms that they always use, and this sort of discourse around counterterrorism, which involves various military partnerships and training and programs that it oversees. And then we know prior to AFRICOM, and I think this is important because AFRICOM comes into existence the latter half of 2007 as Bush is ending out, and it expands under Obama's presidency with the cooperation of the Congressional Black Caucus. But prior to its formation, it was African states were dealt with through the U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, which was responsible for tasking or dealing with Egypt, the Horn of Africa, Kenya, amongst others. The Indo-Pacific Command that dealt with various Indian Ocean nations such as Madagascar and the Comoros, and then the European Command, which most of the African states fell under. And so you can see this kind of continuous slicing up of Africa until it becomes centralized under AFRICOM, but ultimately with the goal of control, with the narrative of security, and And so I do think it's important to understand that, because AFRICOM's operations in Africa over the last decade have included hundreds of drone strikes, billions of dollars in quote-unquote aid development projects through the USAID, and countless massive military exercises. And so when we talk about the relationship between AFRICOM and Sudan, it's important to understand that while there's no military AFRICOM presence, there is, I believe a comrade said in the webinar that Black Alliance for Peace held around AFRICOM that we do every year at the top of the month, he spoke to there being like a human resources department of AFRICOM that's stationed in Sudan, which is okay. All right. But the relationship between AFRICOM and Sudan is not one that's a simple cause and effect, but a strategic entanglement. So AFRICOM's presence and priorities have shaped the regional security landscape in ways that inadvertently empowered the very actors like the RSF, who now threaten to shatter, the entire state of Sudan, while the command remains unable. They can kind of play like they don't have anything to do with it, but they're in a strategic relationship with the UAE.
So they're in a relationship with the UAE, and that takes us to the Juma Boutique, who says Sudanese are being killed due to that Arabs can loot their gold. Is that along the same lines of the point that you just made? Is that too simplistic of an argument?
I would say it's a bit simplistic. Because one, yes, we can say that this is the UAE being an Arab nation, right? Predominantly, that is what they're doing. And so this gives the RSF a form of international legitimacy, right? To be backed by the UAE, who gets to be played like they're on the right side of this. So while the US may not be directly arming them, they're arming the UAE, who is arming the RSF. So when we discuss the United Arab Emirates, the geopolitical influence that they have as regional partners to the US and to Israel, particularly in Sudan. We can also talk about them being in Palestine, Haiti, Somalia, Yemen, Congo. I mean, it goes on and on. But we really must understand that the UAE's geopolitical influence is deeply intertwined with its relationship with the US and Israel. So they're not lone actors. But it is allowing them, or enabling them rather, to play a significant role in the conflicts and political developments in the region. Because the UAE's strategic investments and military interventions and diplomatic maneuvers are designed to secure its regional hegemony, while also aligning heavily with these Western powers. Because we can also talk about the expansion of growth, how UAE was a little desert that could, to where it is now, right? And that is not, again, by happenstance. But the UAE has been not only involved in Sudan, but thinking about the military, the training and mercenary operations in Yemen, involved in the Yemen conflict, or its relationship and involvement right now with Palestine and Gaza, right? So we can say, in one instance, sure, this is a geopolitical strategic way for them to maintain control over Sudan's resources, which is gold, which includes gold. But then they're also involved in Haiti, in Congo, in Somalia, in Yemen, in Gaza. So this complex web of alliances and actions, it underscores UAE's ambition to be a dominant regional partner, often at the cost of exacerbating these conflicts, right? And undermining the self-determination of regions and sovereignty and democratic aspirations of these nations.
So let me ask a very simple, if not simplistic, question. I always say to folks that when you get into these kinds of conversations, it's important to look at a map. So if you understand the geography, the UAE is on the Persian Gulf. Then you got to go through, I think you got to go through Saudi Arabia to get to the Red Sea. And then after you cross the Red Sea, now you're at Sudan. So explain, is this a geographic conflict? Is this a resource conflict? Is this a religious ideological conflict? Why Sudan? Is that too simplistic of a question?
Well, no, I mean, we could say, why not Sudan, right?
I knew that's what you were going to say.
We can make that argument as well, right? Because I think what AFRICOM and the U.S., EU, NATO axis of domination, as it has been playing out, has been successful in doing, is breaking up or balkanizing Africa in these particular regions, right? So we think of East African conflicts and West African conflicts and Southern African conflicts and North African conflicts, right? And then even to some extent Central African, or we look at things below and above the Nile in ways in that, right? Without really kind of, to your point of a map. When we look at the broader Africa, then the question becomes, what does it mean for a continent this big, this vast, this wide, this resource heavy, to be in conversation, to not be balkanized, to not be split up in parts, right? What does that mean in a geopolitical means, right? And then that becomes the question of revolutionary Pan-Africanism as a political objective, right? Which is why there's a continuance to continue to kind of split apart and break apart and balkanize the continent. Because, I always ask people when they talk about Sudan and this question of, or pose it in the terms of humanitarian aid or human rights, why are there two Sudans?
I think thank you, George. I think thank you, George Bush is the answer to that question.
Right. And Hillary Clinton.
Her too. Yeah.
But right. So the way that Africa and African conflicts are talked about is a very like, oh, these things just fell out of the sky, or Africa's always in conflict, or these these ruthless leaders, without any real interrogation of the hows and the whys and how we've come to be here, and what does it mean for a broken apart and balkanized continent as we move forward. And so I think that is what the significance of an AES poses today, right? The advancement of them going from an alliance to a confederation, because they're currently a confederation, and then these conversations about being a federation and the impact it's having on the surrounding nations, right? The ability to have removed AFRICOM from Niger, where we previously was only Eritrea that did not have an AFRICOM presence. So I think that speaks to what we're seeing happening. So when we look at East Africa, I can appreciate the webinar, the ways that the Africa team at the Black Alliance for Peace really begin to kind of have these conversations where last year there was a heavier focus, I think more broadly because of Traore and such, about what is actually developing in West Africa. And then as we see the conflicts, continuing in the Congo and Sudan, there was a conversation about what's happening here. But I also think when we talk about, this month of action, I do want to highlight what the theme of the month of action is.
Go ahead, please.
21st century neocolonialism, capitalism, compradors, and the ongoing scramble for Africa. And so when we talk about like these sort of crises and neocolonialism that's occurring in East Africa, I think we need to have a conversation about Kenya, because Kenya presents itself as a regional stabilizer, quote unquote. But then we see that its actions reveal that it's nothing more than a security subcontractor for Western and Gulf interests. And this plays out, we talked about Kenya in its occupation of Haiti with its police force, but it also plays out in Sudan. Because as we discussed Kenya's role in Haiti as blackface imperialism, because of the U.S.-backed Kenya-led mission to Haiti, is a police occupation aimed at suppressing this sort of crisis of imperialism manifesting as gang violence, right? And also to secure political status quo in Haiti. But we've spoken to that irony of a Kenya police force, which has its own documented record of human rights abuses and extrajudicial killings and mass protesting against the government, being sent to pacify a Black Caribbean nation. But if we're viewing these geopolitical movers as interlocking aspects of Western imperialism, then they represent the normalization, if you will, of U.S. military command style pacification model, but with an African face, or, like we said, with a Black face. So it's making it more politically palatable for the international community. And this brings us to Sudan, because while as they were preparing to send police to Haiti, Kenya's having key financial and logistical meetings with the RSF. And this is the very militia and committing genocide in Darfur, right? That we're speaking about. And this is not, again, by happenstance. These are not accidents. These reflect these sort of alliances of a neo-colonial order where a nation could simultaneously play quote-unquote peacekeeper in one aspect, in this kind of theater, and enable in another aspect, enable a brutal militia. And this is all based on the financial and political interests of its external partners. And we can see that again with the UAE, right? So we need to begin to understand the role of these kind of proxy states, if you will, that are amplifying or continuing what's going on, and not see them as, these kind of separate kind of conflicts, because the same logic that sends Kenyan police to pacify Haiti allows the UAE to use the RSF to pacify and partition Sudan. It's a unified global playbook of pacification that's all kind of being like hamstringed in by the U.S. essentially.
Well, in fact, I'm glad that you put it in the context of the neo-colonial order and the you said pacify states, because folks need to understand Kenya as a former British colony. So hence the neo-colonialism, and Ruto, that then helps to answer the question of whose interests are William Ruto really addressing, because he's not addressing the needs of the average Kenyan. He is a tool in oppressing the Black Haitian at the behest of the United States, and again, former British colony that has never really been able to move beyond its neo-colonial role.
Yeah, and we see that even the surrounding nations, Rwanda, Uganda, it's the same colonial or neo-colonial capture, if you will, that they are being led by their own personal interests. And I think what we're seeing with displays of protests in Kenya is that we have a generation who are tired of comprador leaders, right? But what does it mean to remove the comprador leader? And I think that's the question that we're figuring out, because removal of the comprador leader while the colonial aspects still exist, like an AFRICOM, means what? Right? And I think those are the questions that are being answered right now in the AES. They're being asked and answered, or at least being asked and thought about to be able to answer. And this is something that I think is brewing as we look at the conflicts that are happening across East Africa, because it's not just Sudan, but we're also looking at Somalia is looking to split in a similar way. So we see that these are a sort of rinse and repeat kind of playbook actions by the U.S. and the West more broadly in terms of how they intend to keep their hegemony or maintain their hegemony through these military commands and through these proxy states and actors.
Isn't part of the answer to the question about the removal of the leader who's actually responsible for removing the leader? Because when you look at the Alliance of Sahel States, that's a coup d'etat. That's an organic coup d'etat that is operating on behalf of Burkinabés and the other Nigerians and others, as opposed to the vacuums that gets created when the United States comes in, deposes a leader, and creates this power vacuum, which then, as in Libya, for example, which then results in just enhanced, exponentially created chaos.
Yeah, and in Sudan, right, is an example of them imposing leadership in that way. And I think even to speak of Libya, much of I guess you can call Libya a tinder, if you will. It lit that match because it exasperated quote unquote terrorism and spread, clear into the West, where Boko Haram, etc., the Bring Back Our Girls hashtag, if folks remember that PSYOP. But these are ways that we've seen AFRICOM being able to kind of reassert themselves as a security apparatus protecting these nations and these peoples, and where the AES plays a role, or what their significance rather, in terms of how this is playing out in this sort of fight back, is when we talk about, to your point, who changes the leadership. I think there has been a sort of misconception, because it's military, that it has not been in lock and, well, I don't want to say lock and step, but this has not been a people's sort of movement that, that the people are not behind it.
And that's why I use the word organic.
Right. And I do think that this calls for why there's a necessity for a deeper interrogation of Africa, because the way that people do not discuss Africa, as all of these things are significantly happening, I think really speaks to a misunderstanding, or maybe not clearly understanding why Niger looks different from Gabon, or why Burkina Faso's coup was different from oh Lord, why does it slip me now? Guinea-Bissau? Guinea-Bissau. No, was it Guinea-Bissau? No. Lord, I'll get back to it. Sekou Touré's country. And that's, I'm like, why is that drawing a blank? But yeah, so we've seen coup back to back in the last 5 years, I'd say, right? But they do not look the same, and I do think it speaks to the interrogation of what's happening, which is why the month of action against AFRICOM is, I think, pretty pivotal in how we're able to have these discussions and really interrogate what is happening on the continent. Because out of the month of action and out of the U.S. out of Africa, the Black Alliance for Peace Africa team comes the U.S. out of Africa network, where we are in conversation with grassroots organizations across the continent and being able to decipher what is and is not happening, how we should be understanding what's happening and how we should not. How is it affecting a people? What is the grassroots movement? What is the organic movements that are happening? What are the conversations that are happening? And these are all things that are happening in that network, which allows us to have these sort of, it allows me to be a lot more informed about what's happening on the continent, but it also allows us to produce things like the webinar, that where people are not hearing so much about what's happening in Sudan as we talk about all the time, right? I think people mention that when we talk about Palestine, there's not enough conversation. These are places where these conversations are being had, right? And so I think the question for me becomes, where is it more important? Should we be having the broader kind of public awareness conversation, or should we be really uniting and connecting with organizations on the ground who are in struggle, and seeing what are the strategic discussions we need to be having around how do we, get AFRICOM and the U.S. out of Africa, and what are the sort of models that are developing from east to west, from north to south.
So as we wrap this up, because you've been very gracious with your time, and I know you've got a tight calendar today. Talking about getting AFRICOM out of Africa, what are the 3 salient points that you want the audience to take away from that part of this discussion?
Yeah, I think even as we talk about these sort of months of actions, even as we talk about how these things are interconnected, I do think I want to leave it with, why does it matter to us, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
There's a reason why things are not discussed, or not more of a discussion among us, right? Especially as African descended people, or people consider themselves African, etc. But I do think that when we talk about these commands, whether it is CENTCOM or AFRICOM or the Indo-Pacific Command or SOUTHCOM or the new Space Command that is in existence, because the U.S. has carved up the world into military commands and space. When we talk about these things, we have to remember that global and domestic imperialism are counterparts, right? So these technologies and methodologies are not discarded. They're not left in Palestine. They're not left in Sudan. They're not left in Haiti. They are commodified and militarized by Homeland Security industrial complex, right? So we have to stop analyzing these crises in isolation. The war in Sudan, the mission in Haiti, the militarization of police, or like Dr. CBS likes to say, the policification of our military here domestically, are interconnected symptoms. We have a global security architecture or apparatus where technologies of control are tested abroad and then brought home and vice versa. We have African nations that are incentivized to act as mercenaries and proxies, undermining their own sovereignty and regional solidarity. When we talk about a comprador class, we should be understanding that, or at least aligning that with a Black misleadership class, right? That role that they play as a buffer towards our own kind of liberation. And then Black and brown bodies or colonized people, whether in Darfur or Port-au-Prince or here in Baltimore, they are the primary targets of this system of control. So it's not only exemplified by the release of a National Guard and ICE into our major cities, but into the ongoing policies of austerity and then war that local police departments have, like the access to the now Department of War 1033 program. And then we talk about these data centers, right, that are popping up all over the place. Stingray cell site stimulation, that's part of that. Predictive policing algorithms, things that they're testing in Gaza, it's coming back home. Things that they're testing in Sudan are coming back home, and I think folks refer to that as a sort of boomerang effect. So I do think, like, when we talk about, or at least to end it here, the fight for justice in Sudan is intrinsically linked to the fight for justice, whether it is in Haiti, Congo, Palestine, Venezuela, and the fight against police brutality here in the U.S. in our own internal colonies. They are all battles against the same neocolonial, militarized, white supremacist, U.S., EU axis of domination, and this sort of blow up the world logic to maintain hegemony. So I will encourage folks to go to blackallianceforpeace.com. You can see our month of action. Obviously, it ends tomorrow, but the fight does not end. So please jump in. You still have time to endorse, join the network, the U.S. Out of Africa network. And then, stay tapped in.
Erica Caines, thank you again. You fit us in a tight schedule and a tight window. Greatly appreciate you joining us as always, and look forward to having you back.
All right. Thank you so much. No compromise or retreat.
Enjoy the day. Thank you, Erica. Folks, I want to quickly go back to something that I touched on in the open in one of my headlines, and that is the Trump administration today announced that it's slashing the number of refugees the United States will accept in the coming year and prioritize white South Africans that the Trump administration is alleging that these white South Africans are facing discrimination in South Africa. It has posted a notice in the Federal Register, and they're saying that they're only going to allow 7,500 refugees to be accepted during the coming fiscal year, which started the first of this month to September of 2026. So let me just quickly hit on the irony and the utter racism and idiocy of a policy of that nature. You're going to accept 7,500 refugees in the next fiscal year, and an overwhelming majority of those individuals will be white South Africans, because Donald Trump alleges, without providing one iota, no modicum of evidence, That was so I could know to get Erica out on time. There's no evidence to support the position being taken. Since the title of the show is Connecting the Dots, let me see if I can connect this policy to another policy that is really starting to get a lot more traction. And I think it's called pro-nationalism. This whole idea of birth rates and championing this whole idea of the United States needs to start producing more children. Charlie Kirk talked about this a lot. J.D. Vance is on the stump talking about the need to produce more children in the United States. And what I think this needs to be quickly tied to is racism, white supremacy. Because if what they say is, oh, we need more young adults, we need to start producing more children because Social Security is at risk. So we need more people contributing to Social Security. They're using this number, I think it's 2.1, that women need to be producing 2.1 children. Where that 10th of a child comes from, I'm not quite sure. I'm still working on that one. So that they can replace themselves and their mate. Again, they need to create a larger labor force. They need to protect Social Security. They're giving you these incredibly inane excuses. But at the end of the day, if it was merely a matter of protecting Social Security, then why are you deporting all of these people? If it's you need a labor force, why are you deporting all of these people? If you need a labor force, why are you limiting your number of admittance of immigrants to 7,500? And why are most of those going to be Afrikaners, white folks from South Africa? The logic doesn't make sense. And when I mentioned Charlie Kirk here because he was one of those that was promoting this whole conversation about why do women need to go to college? Women should just stay home. So you're starting to see policy discussed. You're starting to see legislation discussed about that will impact a woman's ability to go to school. We don't need women to be more educated. No, we need women to focus on the family. We need women to be at home producing children. But they're really focused on white children. This is the whole fear of that whole replacement theory foolishness. And this is what Donald Trump, Russell Vought, Stephen Miller. See, we have to start using these names. These are the kinds of ideas that are motivating Project 2025. These are the kinds of things that are really behind the actions that are the illegal actions that are being engaged in by the administration. See, there's a whole eugenics mindset behind this whole thing. Being able to boutique babies, being able to look at the DNA, I guess that would be in utero. Look at the makeup of the fetus and be able to determine hair color, eye color, all of these kinds of things, creating the perfect child as if there is one. I know a lot of folks said I was the perfect baby, but you know, I know that. But other than me, sometimes I make my own self laugh. These are some of the dots that you need to connect, because J.D. Vance is out here promoting this racist trope. They're out here now. It's becoming policy. And so these are some of the things that you need to pay much, much closer attention to. I'm going to bring on next week, I hope, to be able to bring in an expert on this issue, because this isn't happening in a vacuum. And here's another interesting piece. This is in the Washington Post, so you can take it for what it's worth. Americans blame Trump and Republicans more than Democrats for the shutdown. Independents, this is from today's Washington Post. Independents hold Trump and Republicans responsible for the shutdown by a 2-to-1 margin, according to a poll conducted by the Washington Post, ABC, and Ipsos. More than 4 in 10 U.S. adults, 45%, say Trump and the Republicans are mainly responsible for the shutdown. That may lead to cutoff of anti-hunger benefits. The share saying Democrats are at fault grew slightly from 30% when the shutdown began to 33%. And I've been saying since this whole mess started that what was really going to determine the Democrats' ability in their own minds to hold their ground were the polling numbers. This is not a we're going to die on this hill ideological position. I don't think that this is a we're going to die on this hill to carry this point ideological position for the Democrats. They saw a politically beneficial opening for themselves. Remember, before the Democrats were screaming about the explosion of healthcare premiums, what was the issue? The issue was Jeffrey Epstein and whether or not Donald Trump would release the Epstein files as he promised to do. And as they saw, it was gaining traction, but it wasn't really having the impact that they were hoping it would have. They gleaned onto this issue of the benefits, the cost of healthcare premiums, and the impact that this was going to have starting Saturday as people go to the portals to renew their healthcare coverage, and that these premiums were going to explode because the offsets, the tax breaks, were going to expire. And I think the Trump administration made a huge miscalculation. And I've said this before, they didn't think that the Democrats would hold their ground, that the Democrats would fold as they usually do, and that the numbers wouldn't shift to the degree that they have. So now, because Trump has this kind of non-negotiating policy, kind of like the Hannibal, the Hannibal program or Hannibal policy in occupied Palestine. You know, we're not going to negotiate for prisoners. He's backed himself into a corner, and he doesn't really know how to get out of the corner that he's backed himself into because of his unwillingness to sit down and negotiate a simple protection for the health care of the American people. So now Mike Johnson, the speaker, has shut down the House for another week. I think this is the 6th week that they've been on paid vacation, getting absolutely nothing done. All because they're hiding behind this incredibly simplistic, really transparent excuse of, well, if you just pass a continuing resolution, a clean CR, if you just pass a clean CR, then we can sit down and we can work out this other issue. Well, Mike Johnson, if we could trust you, then that statement might actually carry some water. But because you're nothing more than a puppet, nothing more than a lackey, nothing more than a punk for Donald Trump, then what you say can't be trusted because you're no Donald Trump is the ventriloquist and you're the sock puppet. I was going to say that Donald Trump was the ventriloquist and Mike Johnson was the dummy, but to say Mike Johnson was the dummy would mean he has more substance than a sock puppet, and he doesn't. So Donald Trump is the ventriloquist, Mike Johnson is the sock puppet. While the American people are losing their health care coverage or going broke trying to continue to pay for it. Again, see, because here's one of the things to ask yourself. If Donald Trump were really the master of the art of the deal, if he were really the big time negotiator and businessman that he claims to be, what would happen if he flipped the script on the Democrats? What would happen if he said, tomorrow's Friday? If he said, Mike Johnson, open up the House on Monday, bring the Republican caucus back, bring the Democrats in, let's get this done so we can open the government by Wednesday. What if he were really sharp and shrewd and as in tune, flip the script, call the bluff? Oh, you want to negotiate the healthcare deal? Okay, let's start negotiations on Monday. That way you can give everybody time to fly back from their districts. They can come Monday morning, 8:00. I want you all in the East Room. Oh, I'm sorry, you can't do that because you tore down the East Wing. My bad. Want you all in my office. 8 a.m. I'm buying breakfast. And we're going to get this thing done. we're not leaving until it's done. How about that? What would Chuck Schumer do? What would Hakeem Jeffries do? The leadership of the Senate and leadership, the minority leadership in the Senate and the minority leadership in the House. What would they do if he flipped the script and said, Monday morning, 8 o'clock, Melania's making pancakes. Y'all come in. We're going to get this thing hammered out. See, they can't think like that. They can't act like that. They're not that smart. Talk about moving people back. All of a sudden, the government's open. All of a sudden, the healthcare problem is solved, and Donald Trump can run around and say, I got the deal done. But here's the problem. They don't give a damn about the people. They really don't. So he doesn't care that Americans are losing their health coverage. He doesn't care that you can't afford to pay your premiums. He doesn't care that women, infants, and children, or WIC, are going to go hungry or are going hungry. He doesn't care. If he did care, he wouldn't be putting American cattle ranchers out to pasture by importing Argentine beef. He doesn't care. Am I wrong? Y'all tell me. That's the question for the next couple minutes as we get out of here. Let me go all the way. Oh, my dear brother, Kevin Baptiste, thank you. No one has said it better. Thanks, Erica. You're absolutely right. And Kevin, thank you. And Kevin again. No one has said it better. Thanks, Erica. Kevin again. Thank you, Kevin. Greatly appreciate that. So what do y'all think about my idea? Donald Trump. Right now, I think he's back from his Asian trip. Or you know what? You know what would be an even better graphic? You know what would be better optic? I'm sorry. Better optic? Because I don't think he's made it back yet from his Asia trip. So he's on Air Force One. So how about this, Donald? If you're listening, do it right now on Air Force One. You've got that captive, media who are hanging on every word. Come out from behind that little door that you have and say, I'm challenging Chuck Schumer. I'm challenging Hakeem Jeffries. I'm scheduled to land at Andrews Air Force Base at whatever time. Tomorrow morning, I want you in my office. We're going to settle this healthcare issue because we've got to get people back to work. We've got to get the air traffic controllers paid. We've got to get people their checks. We can't have more people going through another pay period without their checks. That's un-American. That's not fair. We can't do that. I'm going to solve this problem. Since you couldn't solve the problem in Gaza, since you couldn't solve the Pakistan-Afghanistan issue, which you said you were going to get done in a day, Donald, you can solve this one. But here's the thing. You got to be thinking. You've got to be strategic, not reactionary. You've got to be strategic. to solve it. You've got to get out of your own way to solve it. You've got to move well, some might say you've got to move beyond your own ego, but flip it. This could go to your ego. This would fuel your ego. Imagine the coverage on Friday on MSNBC, on CNN, in all the major newspapers. Donald Trump has seized control and is solving the crisis of the government shutting down. Yes, Willie, you have to be intelligent to be strategic. You are absolutely. Hence, Willie, you just made my point. That's why he can't do it. That's why Steve Miller can't do it. That's why Russell Vought can't do it. That's why Steve Bannon can't do it. That's why the swamp monsters that he has brought into the swamp that he was supposed to drain, that's why they can't do it. You know, maybe we should call Donald Trump, start calling the creature from the Black Lagoon. And I hope I'm not insulting the creature from the Black Lagoon. Regarding my idea, Wilmer, you're saying that Trump should do this to prevent a MAGA backlash and make Trump a hero? No, Ann Garrison, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying Trump should do it because it's the right damn thing to do. That's why. It's the right damn thing to do. It's the right political thing to do. It's the right economic thing to do. It's the right constitutional thing to do. It's the right thing to do. And the one thing about right, it's always right. Now, all of the other ramifications of what I've just said, Ann Garrison, to your point about the MAGA backlash, blah, 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 blah. Look. Ann, look at this. What if Donald Trump called Marjorie Taylor Greene and said, hey, Madge, look, this is what I want to do. I want you in the room. When I announce this or when I bring up, I want you in the room. See, this really isn't that hard to figure out. I mean, shit, I just did it. If I can do it, you know, it ain't that hard. It's the right thing to do. And look at how he could capture the moment. He could capture the moment. He could actually solve the problem. He created it. I realize that. But all of that would get ignored. All of that would get ignored. Think about it. Let me see anybody else. Well, anyway. Oh, Kevin, you ain't wrong. Oh, thank you, Kevin. Thank you. I'm not wrong. Yes, he is on his way back from embarrassing himself in Asia. That's true. And this is another element. If he did that, the Asian fiasco wouldn't even be in the news. His failing in Ukraine wouldn't be in the news. And the failure he has failed in Ukraine. I was on with I can't remember who I was on with today. But anyway, I made the point that this is Donald Trump. This is Joe Biden's war. The Ukraine conflict is Joe Biden's war, but Donald Trump is now the warrior. Y'all can use that if you want to. It is Joe Biden's war, but Donald Trump is now the warrior, and his failing dramatic failure here would not be nearly the news that it is if he took this tack. Rample sense, what are you saying? Marjorie today posted on X criticizing Israel for killing 140 people and 46 children during the ceasefire. She's mad with them, as she should be. And again, for as despicable as she is, on this one, she's right. Even a blind squirrel can find a nut in the forest once in a while. She's right on this one. And see, here's the thing. Her constituent, she's listening to her constituents. Willie Hicks, the entire economy would do better if they would simply bolster the middle class, but they're too busy hoarding the riches. Look, a big part of this conflict that we're having right now, Willie, you're absolutely right. One of the big parts of this problem that we're having right now is what they call the big beautiful bill, which is actually a huge fiasco, is the largest transference of wealth from the poor and the middle class to the 1% in the history of the country. I'm going to say that again. What they are touting and hailing as the big, beautiful bill, but is actually a monstrosity and a fiasco, is the largest transference of wealth from the poor and the middle class to the 1%. And so I think a big part of your analysis has to start there. Because in order to pay for that monstrosity of a bill that they passed, they've got to gut the social safety net programs that have been helping people since the early 60s. And we can go all the way back to the 40s with Social Security if you want to. So when you look at Trump, when you look at Russell Vought, when you look at Steve Miller, they've made the conscious decision that they rather literally take food from the mouths of children and the elderly. They rather take the peanut butter and the Wonder Bread so that they can have caviar. That's what this is about. That's what this is about. So, folks, thank you all for joining me today. Appreciate you all tolerating my rant. Erica Caines, thank you for joining me today. Tomorrow, Tunde Osasua will join us. We're going to continue this conversation about what's going on in some of the African countries. Please follow, subscribe, leave a review, share the show, follow us on social media. All the links are below in the show description. Remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all tomorrow. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon, and will be even after that. Have a blessed remainder of your day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.